In our modern economy, we are dealing with companies that are basically temporary organizations stewarded by temporary leaders, owned by temporary owners. Everybody involved will be long gone by the time
Right.
we have to pay the price. And that's why we have an economy that is loaded with deferred liabilities, negative externalities, and many other kinds of value destroying behavior. What we need to do is recognize that this is a structural problem that requires a structural solution.
Welcome back to the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andy Temte. On the Balancing Act, we talk to business leaders and industry experts to explore the balancing acts we play in our professional lives and learn about the events that put rocket boosters behind their career success. Today we have Eric Ries joining us. Eric is the creator of the Lean Startup methodology, which is practiced by individuals and companies around the world. He is, obviously, the New York Times bestseller author of The Lean Startup, which was published back in 2011. His new book is Incorruptible: Why Good Companies Go Bad and How Great Companies Stay Great. So I am so happy to introduce everyone to Eric. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for those kind words.
Excellent. Well, Eric, before we get started, I ask all my guests this question. Please give us the elevator pitch version of your story.
Gosh, yeah, elevator pitch. I was a software engineer, growing up as a kid. One of the happiest days of my childhood was when I found out you could get paid for computer programming. I couldn't believe it. I did a startup during the dot-com bubble. I moved out to Silicon Valley to learn how it was done, how things should be done properly, and kind of found out what a mess things actually are, even in the real world, of all these experts. Wound up writing a book called The Lean Startup about a different and I think better way to do entrepreneurship and innovation, and that wound up taking over my life. So I've become an author and a consultant and a founder. Yeah, I feel like it's my great privilege to get to help companies of every conceivable size try to find the best version of themselves.
Isn't it just awesome when your purpose matches the niche that you've carved out for yourself, and you can make a life out of that? I'm very happy for you.
Oh, thank you. I consider myself incredibly blessed, and people ask me, what do you do for a living? And it's hard to even keep a straight face trying to explain it. I have young kids now, and one of my daughters said to me the other day, "How many jobs do you have?" Like, so because I do so many different things. I help create a stock exchange, I've helped create law firms and AI research labs and nonprofit. You name it, I've had a chance to work on it, and it's all because so many people found the ideas helpful. Which, when you're putting an idea into the world, it's both the highest compliment and it's just the most satisfying kind of work I can imagine. So I consider myself very blessed.
Yes. Well, Eric, if you had to pick one event in your life that was just a rocket booster moment, a key accelerant for your career, what would that be?
Well, it's obviously the publication of the Lean Startup. That's kind of obvious. But let me take you back a little bit earlier in time, because by the time I didn't appreciate this at the time, but by the time the book was published, this is in 2011, the rocket had already been lit. So the thing that people often say, that I invented Lean Startup, or the book The Lean Startup had all this impact, which of course I think is really wonderful. But what people don't understand is that the thrust was already in motion, powered by so many people who were excited for these ideas. And I'll tell you one funny story about it. The first really big conference I got invited to speak at about Lean Startup was what was called the Web 2.0 Expo. This is long gone now, but back in the heyday of Web 2.0 in Silicon Valley, this was a really big conference at the San Francisco Moscone Center. I wasn't like a keynote speaker or anything. I was, in one of the breakout tracks of this huge conference, and I had agreed that after my session, we would do what was called an unconference session afterwards. It was like a cool thing where, speakers would go to a certain room and you kind of interact with the attendees and answer questions, not on the stage, but in a more peer-to-peer setting. So I gave that talk. I was incredibly nervous. There was probably 700 or 800 people in the room, which, I didn't know at the time. I had sucked all the audience out of all the other breakouts of that at that hour slot. So I actually had a lot of people pissed off at me. But I just thought that was perfectly normal. I didn't know that was a thing. And I'm like, oh, good. People, look, the room is 100% full to capacity. How lovely. This is a really good conference, so excited. And I gave my talk and I got a standing ovation. I was, very proud of myself. And I was like, oh, that was a relief. So now I start walking over to the unconference so I can answer questions. And I noticed that the room that I'm supposed to go in is filled with people, and the hallway's packed with people. And I'm like, wait, everyone's waiting in line to get in the room. So I get in line. And I'm like, gosh, that's so rude that the previous speaker is still going. I'm like looking at my watch, like, I got to get in there. They're being so rude. I'm just sitting there trying to be patient, gosh, whatever. And a friend of mine comes by in the hallway, in this packed hallway full of people. And he's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, well, I'm waiting for the previous speaker. He's like, you idiot. There's no previous speaker. These people are here for you. And I was like so stunned. There was like hundreds of people mobbing this corridor. And that was like my first hint that, as you say, the rocket had already been lit. Like, I like to take credit for it. I wish it was all about me and my charisma and whatever, but I really think it was about the resonance that those ideas had at that time that turned this into a whole movement for change. And so I got to be kind of the figurehead and the public face of it, and I got to write the book and reap so many of the rewards. But I really believe that those are the people who made it happen. And, I was just at best a catalyst of their work.
Well, it's very, very humble of you to say that, but those kinds of moments are very rare, and it's awesome that you were able to experience that. It's just a bright light that's shining on the fact that product development, innovation, entrepreneurship, these are all really, really hard things that a lot of people and teams struggle with. So let's get to the Lean Startup. We have to assume that not everybody has read the Lean Startup, and there will be listeners that don't know what this is all about. So what's the Lean Startup's primary thesis? And I like to ask this question: if a reader only had headspace to incorporate one main message from the Lean Startup, what would that be?
Okay, so the key idea if you only remember one thing about the Lean Startup, it is that a startup is an experiment. See, very simple. A lot of the details are just deductions from this simple premise that we want to use the scientific method. So we do a real experiment, not astrology, right? We use science. We don't just do an experiment like in the abstract sense, like you would do in an academic research lab. It is a business experiment designed to figure out something very specific about the world. And therefore, the so-called business plan is not a plan at all. It is a list of hypotheses, assumptions, hopes, prayers, guesses about what might happen in the future. And if you want to be successful in an entrepreneurial context or in any kind of innovation situation, our goal should be to find out the actual truth about those things as cheaply and quickly as possible. So that's where the specific techniques that Lean Startup is famous for, most notably the minimum viable product, that initial product experiment that gets the flywheel turning of what's called the build, measure, learn feedback loop. And most importantly, for sure, is the idea of the pivot. I'm sorry, that has become the most overused bit of business jargon in the last 10 years, probably. That's partially my fault. So the pivot is a change in strategy without a change in vision. When we discover that one of our leap of faith assumptions is wrong, we don't want that to crater the whole enterprise. We want to have the opportunity to make this structure change, where we keep one foot firmly rooted in what we've learned while moving the other one half step at a time.
Excellent. The fact that you're shining a light that business and new product launches, they're experiments, and we should use the scientific method. I always get a kick out of a startup's financial pitch, where you see the hockey stick and the revenue line is just going up and the profit is just going up, and that should be your first warning that that whoever built that bright shiny deck is not really thinking about the business as an experiment. So thank you
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that.
I used to joke, I did a lot of corporate work, and I would see that corporate, even in corporate settings, I would see that chart. Like in the sequel to Lean Startup, I wrote a book called The Startup Way, and tell the story about being at one of the world's largest companies at company headquarters, and having someone pitch me this unbelievable revenue chart. It was a bar chart, revenue by year for the next like 30 years. And it, had the first 5 bars of the chart were blank, because obviously no revenue during the stealth R&D phase while we secretly work out this brilliant product anyway. And then it got off to these billions and billions of dollars. And I remember thinking to myself, this is kind of like Silicon Valley's third leading export after hype and buzzwords. It's like this hockey stick shaped graph. It does happen sometimes in real life, but when we try to predict it prospectively, we usually run into big trouble.
Yeah, for sure. And we put all our eggs in those baskets, and then
That's quite
our
dangerous.
emotions and our biases get in the way as we're trying to unwind from that sunk cost. Everybody forgets basic sunk cost economic from economics 101. So anyway, let's talk about let's get back to the MVP, the minimum viable product. You published the Lean Startup in 2011. What's the main thing that you've learned since publishing the book in 2011 about what works best about MVPs? And then let's flip it on its back. And how has your thinking about the MVP concept evolved?
Yeah. Boy, I've learned so much. I mean, this is now 15 years I've had the chance to refine and iterate on this concept. So definitely I have seen it applied in a lot more industries and domains than I ever imagined. I mean, I'm talking about deep sea oil drilling and kitchen appliances and nuclear power and drug therapies, and obviously a lot of AI stuff and other crazy things. So that you see the breadth of its applicability. I would say the biggest thing that breadth helps you understand is that an MVP is going to look very different on the surface based on the industry you're in, because it depends fundamentally on 2 dimensions of the change that is going through that industry. First dimension is like, to what degree is there uncertainty about what customers want? The only time I ever give a talk or do work with a company where somebody like really strongly objects to the idea of Lean Startup, it'll always be someone whose job is like to manage an existing product or customer relationship where they have really clear understanding of what are the next steps that need to be done. And so I always tell them, look, if you already know what's going to happen in the future, what do you need me for? But you better make sure that nothing's going to change. And luckily you're immune from disruption. And they'd be like, oh yeah, we certainly are. Like, well, great. As long as there's no internet or mobile or AI or anything, you're probably gonna be fine. So you'll call me back if that ever changes. And I've been at it long enough. I've gotten that call back. Now some people are like, oh, I thought our business was completely safe. And one of my favorites is like, for some reason, Amazon just entered our category, or like Samsung just started. Like these like super fast cycle time businesses sometimes enter your category. And even if you had a perfectly safe, high margin monopoly, now you're in big trouble. And that's the second dimension. The second dimension is, what is the underlying cycle time of the development of the product? And that's where people really get this wrong, because a lot of Lean Startup techniques, I come from software development. So in software, we have extremely fast cycle times in a lot of product categories, although interestingly not in AI, which is super interesting, because the previous era of software was very, 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 very high margin, low cost to operate, highly malleable stuff, where really just creativity was our only barrier. So of course, in the case of mobile or web development, to be able to launch an MVP, basically every day, that's completely reasonable. Obviously, if you're making a physical appliance you're building, I remember working on a combined cycle power plant once, where the development time for these things is measured in years and decades, not days and weeks, and where the thing is designed to have a multi-decade life. It's not a disposable app or something like that. So the people get confused. They say, well, how am I supposed to, I'm making a dating app. You want me to apply the same techniques I use in a dating app to a combined cycle power plant? No, obviously not. The question we have to ask is, can we gain, for whatever reason, either because of a business model improvement, a new technological development, simply a better business idea, some kind of superior partnership, a regulatory change, by whatever means we have available to us, can we achieve for our experiment a cycle time advantage compared to the industry baseline? And whenever we see that special combination of cycle time advantage plus high uncertainty, that really is the sweet spot for MVPs.
Mm, mm, okay. Yeah, I come from the world of education, and my time was in a 100-plus-year-old company, right? And the ship turned very slowly, and I think that's we struggled with developing MVPs because of that cycle
Of
time
course.
mismatch. We really didn't think as carefully as we should have about cycle time. We were just like, MVP, let's get it out there as fast as possible. And then you run into this customer experience issue where you've got existing customers that are used to consuming education in this way, and then you're asking them to do something completely different. That was where we struggled.
Yeah, yeah, it super hard.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, no, I was just gonna say I've been in that situation with many clients, including in education, and of course, those obstacles make it difficult. And the secret to it is to try to find, you got to find the breakthrough that nonetheless allows you to achieve speed even under those conditions. It can be very difficult, but when you find that magic combination, it unlocks a lot of creativity.
Yeah, cool. So I like to ask mentorship moment questions. We'll do a hypothetical here. You've got the chief product officer of a mid-size, $500 million organization sitting right in front of you right now. They're working to adopt the lean startup methodologies into their business. What's your advice to this individual to improve the likelihood of success?
You mean for their company overall or for an individual product?
For their adoption of the lean startup methodologies, and
Yeah.
let's pick an
Yeah, I'm
individual
going.
product.
Cause funny, a company kind of that meets that criteria just called me the other day. I was just having this conversation because they were really struggling, and the struggle was fascinating because they understood intellectually the principles of lean startup as it relates to an individual team. That this is a company where the founder is still the CEO and is still around, so he remembers what it was like to be a startup, but he hasn't yet made the conceptual shift to understand that now that the company has thousands and thousands of employees, he's not the founder. He has lots of founders that work for him. He's not the startup. He is a portfolio manager that manages this massive portfolio of established businesses and also startup businesses. And therefore, the techniques, the company policies and procedures that apply to each of the portfolio segments has to be different in the same way that the criteria for a bond fund is different from a, international growth fund. And that is really difficult because although we've taught people how to think about portfolio construction and diversification in finance, we have not really done a good job teaching that same discipline in operations or in product. So that is a very common struggle. And the solution is to really focus on individual teams first, create what we call an island of freedom for each individual team to adopt techniques like lean startup, hold them accountable for doing so, hold your executives accountable for holding them accountable to do so. So there's like a very clear hierarchy of steps you have to take. And then once you've built up enough of a data set that you can start to consider these projects not as one-off exceptions, but as a corporate function, then you can start to apply portfolio level thinking, data, and accountability to the people who oversee the people who oversee those projects and their investments. Excuse me.
I all throughout this conversation, the two words change management are swimming around in the back of my head. I got to
Mhm.
imagine that change management practices are a huge part of the implementations and the conversations that you're having, because creating those islands of independence, boy, that's really, really hard in a 100-year-old company or a 50-year-old company that grew from nothing to several thousand employees.
Yeah. It is. It's a challenge, but I always push people on how well is it working right now. Like, so if like I mean another company came to me recently and they're like, we can see that AI is coming for our whole business, and if we don't change, we're doomed. And then the whole rest of the conversation was about how hard it is to change. And how, basically like almost asking me to absolve them of having to do it because of how difficult it was. And I'm like, first of all, who are you talking to? Like, I'm obviously never going to be like, yeah, just stick with the status quo. I'm not wired that way. Even if status quo was great, I probably was sitting there trying to get you to change it. But also, you just told me this problem is existential. And I remember I had that conversation with the leadership of Pitney Bowes. Remember the mail sorting company?
Oh, yeah.
This is many years ago when they were just, still the majority of the revenue was still coming from physical postal mail, but obviously we could see the digital disruption. I remember having this conversation with GE Lighting when I remember going to meeting their senior executives, and I had gone on Wikipedia the previous night because I didn't really know a lot about light bulbs, except I vaguely knew LED was, here to say this is at the advent of LED lighting. And I was like, hey, it looked to me like this graph cost plummeting. I just see this graph of the takeover of LED light bulbs. Like, are we equipped to handle that? And everyone's like, well, but yes, but this, and it's so difficult and whatever. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm just an outsider. I don't know anything, but seems like your business is about to go away. So can we match the urgency of our situation to what is happening? And the truth is, a lot of people, first of all, are compensated using short-term compensation instruments, so they don't really especially care or even feel like they're being paid not to think about stuff like that. And second of all, it can be very difficult, even if you say you believe that these things are existential, to nonetheless go out of your comfort zone enough to make the necessary investment.
I liken the status quo for some as a security blanket. They just wrap themselves in it, and it's warm and fuzzy at the time, but it's going to get ripped off. All right. Well, Eric, let's take a really short commercial break, and we'll be right back. Want to understand money, markets, and the economy to make better financial decisions? I'm Andy Temte. Join me every Saturday morning for Money Lessons with Andrew Temte on YouTube or your favorite podcast streaming service. And we're back with Eric Ries talking about continuous improvement and product management. Let's go to your new book, Eric, Incorruptible, Why Good Companies Go Bad and How Great Companies Stay Great. Again, what's the primary thesis? And if you met a reader on the street 6 months after they engaged with the book, what would you want their unaided recall takeaway to be?
So this book is a little bit different. It asks a little bit of a bigger question about why so many companies lose their way, really lose their soul, and become kind of indistinguishable, gross, bureaucratic corporate blobs. Like what's going on? Like, why look around our economy? What is happening? And so the book has kind of two kinds of readers for it. They're right there in the subtitle, what I call the why readers. Why is this happening and what is causing it? I diagnose and give the history of how we got into this situation. And then the how readers. I didn't want to write a manifesto or kind of a critique book without offering solutions. So the majority of the book and the one thing I hope people will take away from this book is that this is a 100% solvable problem. And every element of the solution is known, understood, and studied. So this is not a situation where like it required some, radical new crazy idea that no one's ever heard of. What it requires is putting the pieces together to see how we have to take a comprehensive approach to build organizations that can resist these corrupting influences.
So if you met somebody on the street, what would you want them to parrot back to you?
The most important idea is that not all ways of making money are equally good. Some are better than others.
Excellent. So take us inside a story of a good company gone bad. You don't necessarily need to name names, but if that could be a little more fun. What were the major drivers of that business's challenges?
Yeah. So, failure is a natural part of business. And so the book, we don't talk in the book about what I call ordinary failures. Ordinary failure is something like company has some success, runs into competition, competitors outcompete it, it gets disrupted, technological change, and therefore it fails. Or, in the case of a startup, couldn't raise enough money, didn't have product market fit, just failure in the marketplace to create enough value to sustain itself. Those failures should not bother anybody. I've lived through them, so of course they're painful, but that's a natural part of the creative destruction of our financial system, no problem. This book is about what I call unusual failures that have a slightly different structure. These are failures that are caused by the success of the company. So we're talking about a company whose ethos gets systematically dismantled right when it's at the height of its success. And I give examples spanning the last 200 years of this happening over and over and over again, decade by decade by decade. If anyone remembers, FedMart or Sears or, a very famous example, Robert Owen, who took over the New Lanark Mills in Scotland in the 19th century, and tons and tons of these companies. And what's really interesting is if you ask people today about Toys R Us or Circuit City or Sears or Sunbeam or all, there's all these kind of nostalgic companies from a previous era, even Blockbuster Video. And you say Kodak, whatever happened to Kodak or Polaroid, whatever happened, we think, oh, they're old fashioned companies. They kind of didn't adapt with the times. They got disrupted and now they're gone. But if you dig into every single one of those companies, you will find that that is not really what happened. Instead, what you see is they were powered by a very specific ethos. They were mission driven. They featured employee ownership. They featured investments in R&D, product quality. It's, the ethos is different for different companies, but they generally followed the scheme I call enlightened capitalism. That is, they realized they could make more money by being generous, by investing in open source and our collective commons, than by squeezing every dollar. And even though they proved how profitable that approach was, something intervened and took it away and drove them right into bankruptcy. That is so common that you can taste it in the food these days. And I'll tell you a funny story. I saw this, I think I saw this on YouTube. Another famous business expert was telling the story about going to lunch with a friend at the friend's favorite restaurant, but he hadn't been there in a few years. And they sat down for lunch and, they talked to and the friend was acting a little odd, when the service was like, he didn't like the service that much. And anyway, they get their food. The friend takes one bite and takes out his phone. And the person telling the story is like, this is kind of rude. Hey man, phone. And he's like, looking, he's like, just give me 1 second. And he's like, yep, that's what I thought. And he turns the phone around and he says, I knew from one bite that this restaurant had been taken over by private equity. I could taste it.
Really?
And I've had that experience, and so has almost everybody I talk to. You're like, there's some great brand, and its very greatness is what made it worth taking over and loading with debt and loading up with, and squeezing the costs out of and squeezing the suppliers and lowering quality and whatever. We just see this over and over and over again. So what I wanted to understand is why does this happen and what can we do about it? Because the flip side of it is I have been working at this, I've been in the industry now for a little while. So I've helped hundreds, thousands of people start companies. I can't even count at this point. And I've seen many, many, many of them achieve product market fit and go public. And I've helped people create, I am not exaggerating, billions of dollars of personal wealth. And yet so many of those companies, the founders wind up miserable. The company loses what made it special. And I've had this front row seat to watch them get surgically deboned year after year. And I couldn't understand why. Why are these best practices being taught the way that they are? And so when I went down the rabbit hole of trying to understand the history of how we got here and the data we have about these specific practices, I was really shocked that most of today's corporate governance and kind of operational and cultural best practices are value destroying, not value creating. So we are teaching people how to build weak and unsuccessful companies that are designed to be dismantled. And I think we should stop doing that.
Yeah, that is a fantastic thesis. I like to talk a lot about value addition and just having that front and center, that concept front and center. When I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about what value am I going to add to myself, my family, society, the company today, and that ethos at the corporate level, which is a living, going concern. should be very much the same.
Absolutely.
Eric, when I think about Incorruptible, when I saw the title, I immediately thought of Jim Collins's Good to Great series. What differentiates Incorruptible from Mr. Collins's work that he started back
Yeah,
in
yeah, for
2001?
those who are really for the business geeks and business book
Yeah.
geeks, especially among us,
Hello.
the ellipsis in the subtitle is a Jim Collins reference because that is not considered a book title best practice anymore. But everyone knows Good to Great why some companies make the leap dot dot dot
Yeah.
and others
Yeah.
don't. And I wanted to reference that because that's of course an important that's an important part of the shared history we have that has gotten us to where we are. The difference between Incorruptible and a lot of these other books is we're not trying to understand how to get business success, except in this roundabout way. We're trying to look at what are the problems that business success creates, and therefore how do we preserve it for the long run. Now we do get into a lot of, it's funny that there's a lot of overlap, with Jim Collins's work and obviously with Clay Christensen and Jeff Moore and all the greats, because at the end of the day, you can't talk about mission-driven companies without being able to identify what are the magnetic attractors that cause success in the first place. So of course we talk about how to build a strong culture company and the operational side of it, how to establish a corporate purpose, how to build, as you say, a corporate ethos, and how to center value creation rather than extraction at the heart of the enterprise. So those are primarily operational questions, and they have a lot of overlap with Jim Collins' work. But where we deviate is rather than see those as ends in themselves or things that can be protected through superior leadership, we acknowledge that the forces that we're up against are structural, and no individual human person, no matter how good a leader they are, can personally guarantee that these forces will not intervene. And in fact, I criticize a lot of business leaders, not that it's their fault, but just for them to really understand how very naive they are, thinking that their success alone will protect them. The more success they have, the more leverage they will have, therefore the more control over the organism they will have. And yet I have seen time and time and time again that success attracts like people who want to control that success. Profits attract predators. And if you're not structured to be able to resist, you will wind up as a future tragic case study in some future book on enlightened capitalism. And I've helped create enough of those already in my life. I don't want to do it again.
Very good. Eric, what have we not talked about today that you want to make sure that listeners get from this conversation? And then as a follow-on, where can folks learn more about you?
Sure. Yeah, well, so it's very important to understand when as soon as we start talking about corporate purpose and mission and this kind of stuff, a lot of people start to get the heebie-jeebies. I understand. So like, wait a minute, is this some ESG bullshit? Like whatever, like forgive my language. Like, wait, hold on. I'm just trying to make a business. Now, I'm just trying to create something of high quality. I totally get it. One of my favorite quotes in the book is from a big financial investor who was criticizing Unilever because Unilever, a few years ago was trying to infuse quote unquote purpose into all of their products. And the investor was like, come on, man, at the point that we're talking about the purpose of Hellmann's mayonnaise, I think we've lost the plot. Which I love that. Such a memorable and funny line. Except what's so wild about it is that, of all the things he could have chosen to criticize, Hellmann's mayonnaise, humble though it may be, is food. So actually, it's something whose purpose is extraordinarily clear. It is to nourish and delight the people that eat it. And if you think that doesn't matter, and that's just some positioning, marketing nonsense, I hear you, but I think it matters a great deal. For example, imagine an efficiency consultant shows up and says, listen, we can save 3 cents a jar by making the food a little bit more toxic or unhealthy or even addictive. And you could say, well, but hold on, in the long run, if you put carcinogens in the mayonnaise, that's going to be bad for the company. But if you look at every person involved in making that decision, from the efficiency consultant to the product manager to their boss, the CEO, you ask yourself, well, by the time the chickens come home to roost, where will this person be? In our modern economy, we are dealing with companies that are basically temporary organizations stewarded by temporary leaders, owned by temporary owners. So everybody involved will be long gone by the time we have to pay the piper. And that's why we have an economy that is loaded with deferred liabilities, negative externalities, and many other kinds of value-destroying behavior. So what we need to do is recognize that this is a structural problem that requires a structural solution. It's not anti-profit. It's not anti-capitalism. It's not. I'm not against people creating a lot of value in the world. I actually think this follows the moral logic of capitalism far more than people who are pushing an extractive agenda. And I go back into all the history in the book. This idea that not all ways of making money, by the way, are that all ways of making money are equally good, is one of the most ancient ideas in the book. Like this dates to Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas and Adam Smith and so many of our most important thinkers on economics in both secular and non-secular contexts have been able to make this distinction between productive, value-creating ways of making money and extractive, value-destroying ways of making money. In fact, if you look at the etymology of the word profit, it comes from the same Latin root as words like manufacture and efficiency. And if you look at the word finance, it comes from the same Latin root as finish or define or confine. So we used to have a very clear understanding, even in our grandparents' time, that we create value and then we try to define or extract a small piece of it for ourselves. And that's the path, the socially productive path to creating profit. And yet in our modern world, we're supposed to pretend now that we think that all ways of making money are equally fine. And in fact, people who just move money around or people whose behavior is extractive and not value creating, you're supposed to say, well, yeah, that was probably socially bad, but you got to hand it to him. He sure did make a lot of money. And I just feel like we need to stop doing that. It's like, enough.
Yeah.
No, we don't have to hand it to them. I'm not saying those people should be in prison. I'm just saying we who build things for a living should stop pretending that we think that's good. We should just be like, no, we understand that it is the people who create value ultimately that power our entire civilization. They are the heroes of this story. And I don't just mean the founders and the leaders and the executives and the board members. I mean every person, every artist, every factory worker, every foreman, everybody who has their hands on the value creating engine that keeps so many people alive today. They are the heroes of the modern economy. And we ought to build an economic system that appreciates, rewards, and applauds them appropriately. And unfortunately, we've got it totally backwards these days. So we've got a lot of work to do. But I'll say one last thing, because I'm talking about systemic solution. Some people assume that this is a political book about policy stuff. And it was actually very difficult. I had to really resist the temptation. I wrote this whole book without using the word stakeholder. And I wrote the whole book without making any political or policy prescriptions, because I wanted to write a book where every single technique in the book, and this is my promise to every potential reader who's thinking about it, every technique that I recommend in this book is, first of all, implementable today. You don't have to wait for some new law to be changed. There's no policy. This is not like after we fix this and this and this. Then, everything is a technique you can use in a current company right this minute. Every single one has examples from real life companies of significant scale who have tried it successfully. And third, every single one is backed by extensive academic research that shows that it is value creating more than the alternative best practices that we teach today.
Yeah, the word that is really front and center for me is the word stewardship. And I, in my next book, I've got a whole chapter on the difference between stewardship and ownership, and the implication is the extractive versus this concept of a going concern, showing up, adding value, knowing that there's going to be somebody in this chair after I get up out of it, and I want to leave it a better place, the best possible place for them to be successful and not extract everything. So kudos. Where can folks get a hold of you?
Yeah, well, so the book is called Incorruptible. You can learn more about it at incorruptible.co. And obviously it is, and wherever books, audiobooks, ebooks are sold, if people go to incorruptible.co, they can get certain bonuses, especially if they pre-order the book. And to follow me, I'm not really that much on social media. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Blue Sky, just at Eric Ries, ERICRIES, in all the places you would expect. And I guess if you really want the latest, you should join my mailing list, which you can do on my website at incorruptible.co.
That's excellent. Let's have a little bit of fun here at the end with some lightning round questions. You ready?
Okay, let's do it. I'm ready.
All right. Number one, you've just won a $100 million lotto jackpot, but there's a stipulation that half of your net winnings go to one philanthropic organization or cause. Who do you pick?
Gosh, I guess it would have to be something like Partners in Health, who's doing incredible work bringing healthcare, to the developing world. But gosh, I mean, that's an impossible question. There's so many worthy causes. That's just the first one
Yeah.
that popped in my head.
Yeah. Next question. I give you access to a really small time machine. You can send a message to an earlier version of Eric Ries. What's the message and what previous version do you send it to?
It's impossible. This is the problem. I know myself too well. I know how stubborn I was when I was younger. So the person I need to send the message to is not someone who will be listening to my advice in the slightest. But yes, I would love to send my younger self to slow down and be present and actually try to experience what's happening, not be racing on to the next thing.
Yeah, wouldn't that be
I
awesome?
know. I'm sure he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I suffered from that exact thing. Eric, we are all works in progress. What are you focused on right now in your personal journey of growth?
Well, thanks for that question. Gosh, this project, writing this book is one of the hardest things I've ever tried to do. It required just an incredible amount of patience and perseverance. And I think an underrated attribute is equanimity. It took me a long time to realize how important that is, both to the creative journey as well as to the entrepreneurial journey. Because if I look back now on all the events that led up to this book, so many of them at the time, I would have said, well, that's really bad. But I can see in retrospect that that's one of the best things that ever happened to me. And conversely, there's lots of things where I'm like, phew, sure glad that happened. And now I realize, oops, that was a disaster. And so learning to not judge the things that are happening to you as good or bad, but simply accepting them as they are has been something I really struggle with. But I think the more I do it, the more I see how powerful an idea it is.
Excellent. Eric, it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for your significant contributions to our listeners today.
Yeah, thank you for saying so. I appreciate it.
Excellent. My name is Andy Temte. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major streaming services as well as out on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public good with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and maybe a neighbor. The show was produced by Nick Temte, and we'll see you next time on The Balancing Act.